Hi, I'm Mamta. Today we are going to do chapter 2, which is Methods of Inquiry in Psychology. All of us are researchers. Let's see, when we research, what are the limitations that we face, what are the ethics that we have to follow, and how do we analyze the data for doing research. Let's start with topic 1, limitations of psychological inquiry. We have 4 topics here. First, lack of true zero point. Now, when we do research, a lot of times there's a comparison between physical research and psychological research. When we do physical research, let's understand when we measure the length of the table or we measure the height of the table, there is a fixed data that comes in, there's a fixed measurement that comes in. But when we do psychological measurement, we cannot start from zero. Can we say intelligence, somebody having zero intelligence? That is not possible. Therefore, there has to be a relative study that we do. There cannot be a 0 point. That becomes a limitation of psychological inquiry, which is very much there in physical inquiry. And also when we compare to people, their position, let's say somebody who's got the first position and the other person who's got the second position. Now, we do not know what is the difference in their marks. We do not know how much the first person has done better than the second person. So, all these comparisons have to be understood, which we call as rating scales and different kinds of scales. That is a scaling method that we use in psychology to deal with the limitation of 0 point. We move on to the second point, relative nature of psychological tools. Now, a lot of times the tool, any tool for research which we develop in psychology, that may be limited to a particular culture. For example, in America, if I am developing a particular tool, it may not be possible to use it for the Indian cultural context. Any tool meant for African tribals may not be possible to be used somewhere else. Therefore, it becomes very important to adapt or modify the tools based on the cultural context. This is what we call as relative nature of psychological tools. Third, subjective interpretation of qualitative data. Now, we very well know that we use a lot of qualitative data in psychology. We understand, we interpret, we give meaning according to what we think as a researcher. This is where our subjective biases comes in. Obviously, when we are dealing with human beings and human beings are doing the research, this subjectivity is bound to come in psychological research. Last point, relative value of scores. Now, again, scores cannot be absolute, they cannot be fixed, it changes. Suppose a person's intelligence is measured for a certain time, that intelligence is stable. After a point of time when the person grows up, that intelligence level will vary. So, every psychological variable, by the term variable itself, changes its values, takes on different values. That is what we call as relative value of scores. These are the 4 limitations. Let's move on to the next content, which is ethics. Now, when we talk about research, every researcher has to follow certain ethics, because these are the guidelines so that you are not exploiting the subject or the participant that is coming in for helping you in the study. Let's look at the 5 points here. First, voluntary participation. Now, when you will be doing experiments on certain participants known to you or unknown to you, you will be calling them for helping them out for the study. Now, this participation will be voluntary. You can never force them, you can never give them bribe, you can never use any kind of negative mechanism to force them into the study. It is perfectly their consent, their choice if they want to be a part of the study. If they want to withdraw somewhere in the middle of the experiment, again you cannot do much. You can try and convince. If they are not convinced, you cannot really force. If somebody is not well, for instance, again you cannot force somebody to be a part of the study. So, that is one ethics that you have to understand as a researcher. Second ethic, informed consent. Now, a lot of times when we talk about an experiment in psychology, children are very scared. Anybody whom you want to be a part of the study, they will come in with a lot of preconceived notions. They will ask you, and they will have a lot of fears at that time. Let's say one of the fears which is very common is, will I be given electric shocks? And suppose if you tell those people that we are going to give you electric shocks, do you think they are going to be a part of the experiment? I really doubt. So, these are the constraints, these are the limitations which you have to work with. Along with that, another ethical aspect that comes into picture is the fact that when you are calling them for study, you may not be telling them every data, because some data you need to hide as a part of the study. Let's say when you tell a particular child that you are so dumb. Now this particular remark is a part of the experimental research, the particular design that you have for experiment. Now at that particular time, you're not telling that person that we are telling this particular statement just for the purpose of study. So that is where the person's choice again comes in, whether the person is comfortable, whether the person is aware of what is going to happen in the study. Suppose you are going to use any unpleasant stimulus, any kind of stimulus which is not very comfortable. Again, you need to tell the participant that this is what I am going to use. But at the same time, if you are not supposed to tell as a part of the research design, then in that case the third step comes in, which is the third ethics, which we call as debriefing. This means that you are going to brief the participant before the participant leaves the study. So before the person walks out of the experiment, once the experiment is done, you need to tell the person why we said certain remarks, why we used certain conditions, why we formulated a certain experiment in a certain way, so that the person doesn't go out with any kind of trauma. The person goes out with the same mental state that the person walked in with. That is debriefing. Fourth point, we share the results of research. Now this is a very beautiful point, a very good ethic, which says that every participant who walks in needs to know, because everybody has expectations. They have these thoughts: what is the person going to do with me? What will happen? What kind of result will I get? So sharing the result becomes very handy, because the person, the participant who is there as a part of your research needs to know what were the results like. Do they match with the person's opinion that he or she has of himself? In fact, that is going to help you in understanding the person in totality also, and telling you what was the positive aspect of the research that you did. Last point, confidentiality. Now this again is a very beautiful point. In fact, this point is used even for counseling. The term, when we look at it, confidence. Now this means that you are going to keep the data of the participants in privacy. You're not going to reveal or leak out any kind of private confidential data for any purpose. So the best way to deal with this is that you try and put code words instead of names of participants. That is all about the ethics. Let's move on to the last topic, which is data analysis. Now when we talk about analyzing the data, we have two major methods. First is quantitative research method. The second is qualitative research method. Now qualitative by name is a very simple method which doesn't involve any calculations. It only involves a subjective study. So qualitative study, for instance, let me say that if I am analyzing your family photographs, now that will not involve any numbers or calculations, but yes, that will involve the kind of body posture that you are having in the photographs, the family bonds that are there, the kind of picture that is clicked, the kind of smiles. All these body posture aspects will be analyzed. So that is a qualitative method. So one could be photographs that are analyzed, one could be if I tell you to write a story and I analyze your thoughts and your mind through the story. If I tell you to narrate something, again that is a qualitative research method. So what is happening is we are analyzing the content, the subject's thoughts, opinions and values and emotions. All this is being analyzed. That is a qualitative research method. Next we have is quantitative. Now of course, although we try in psychology to use qualitative methods, but even then to scientifically document research, to validate, we need numbers. We need to cut down certain figures. So this is where qualitative method comes in very handy. We have three major methods here. Central tendency, that's the main method we are going to do. Methods of variability and correlation coefficient. Central tendency, as the term itself says, tendency to hover around the center. That basically means we have three parameters here: mean, median and mode. All three of them tend to have same values and they tend to hover around the center aspect. Now when we look at this, how to calculate rather. In fact, here we can try and understand mean median mode, the calculation part of it, and of course we can try and understand the two visual graphic representations through which we can draw diagrams using certain statistical techniques. So let's look at the first one. Here we have to do basically frequency polygon, histogram and bar diagram. Now the difference between a histogram and bar diagram is that histogram basically has combined bars, whereas frequency polygon has lines which are drawn in the middle point of the bar diagram, and of course bar diagram is separate bars. So you can draw out line joining the midpoints of the histogram, and that will be combined bars, whereas in the other case of bar diagram it will be separate bars. That is the only difference. Now let's look at how to formulate a frequency table using class intervals. Now when we look at the data given here, we have a data varying from 140 range to 190 range. Now 198 is the highest and 140 is the lowest. Now looking at this, when we try and understand subtracting from the highest to the lowest, that is the first step to calculate the table. So highest when we look at the table is 198 and the lowest when we look at is 141. When we subtract the two, we get a value of 57. Now with this value, what we have to do is to decide how many class intervals will be there, along with which we will have the number of cases occurring in each class interval. Now we have to construct 10 to 20 class intervals according to the norm. So we try and take 5 as the width of the class interval. Therefore, we divide 57 by 5 and we get a value of 12. So we have around 12 class intervals that we have to take, and therefore when we talk about conversion of every score into frequency, we try and count the number of scores occurring in a particular class interval. So starting from the lowest of 141, let's take it 141 to 144. We have 5 class intervals here, 5 variations here. So any score which falls in this pattern will be coming in this frequency. We include tally bars here. And this is how we formulate the histogram, and we combine the midpoints and formulate the frequency polygon. Now central tendency, we have 3 points to cover. One is mean. Let's start with that. Now mean is a very simple yet a very effective tool for central tendency. What we do here is we call it an average. So what we do is we try and add the total number of observations and we divide them by the sum of that observation. So let's look at the example. We combine all of them and divide it by the total number for the ungrouped data. For the group data, again we try and do in a similar manner. When we combine this data, what we try and do is we from the class interval table, we try and take it up and we follow the same format. Median is basically referring to the cut point which divides the distribution into 2 equal halves. So what we do for the median then is we take the number that comes in the middle. In case that is not an odd number, an even number, look at the example, then we divide the 2 middle occurring numbers and divide it by 2. That is for the ungrouped data. This is for the group data where we follow up this formula. We divide 169.5 is the variation that we take and we add it up. This is the formula that we follow and we calculate the median. Last is the mode, which is the highest occurring score. It's a very simple one, but it misses out on certain data. The best part is it covers all kinds of data, but then it misses out. So it's very easy to calculate the mode. We take the highest value here, which is occurring maximum number of times. Look at the example, it is 8 in number, and for the table we have frequency of 10, so the midpoint comes out to be 172. That's about it. Thank you.